I babysat 3 times in my life, and 3 times something happened that still wakes me up. That line, "You won't believe this," isn't a tease. It's truth. I was 15, then 17, then 21. Each night felt ordinary until it didn't. Each house was quiet, normal, the kind of place you don't expect danger to show up. That's what made the fear so sharp. My name is Chris. I'm telling these stories because I keep thinking about the little alarm bells we ignore, the ones kids hear and adults explain away. If any of this sounds familiar, if you babysit or you have kids, listen. And if you like true scary stories, subscribe for more. I'll tell the rest. Story 1. The Closet, age 15. The house belongs to Mark and Diane, family friends. It's the kind of house that smells like peanut butter and warm laundry. Charlie is 5, with a face always smudged with something, usually something cheesy. They asked me to come over on a Friday night. I'd done small things for them before, water the plants, pick up mail. This was my first real babysitting job that felt grown up. Dinner was mac and cheese and chicken nuggets. Charlie ate like nothing was wrong in the world. They told me to keep his door cracked and to make sure the back door was firmly locked before I went upstairs to the guest room. Diane showed me the deadbolt and the bottom latch, demonstrating how the latch popped in. The instructions were precise but casual. She left in a hurry, words loose and anxious. Work call, be home by midnight. Mark gave Charlie a hug at the door, patted my shoulder, said, "You'll be fine, kiddo." They were gone and the house settled with the normal sounds of a family. The hum of the refrigerator, a clock in the hallway, a low TV in the living room they left on for background. We did story time for a while. Charlie picked a book with animals and insisted on being spoon-fed the last bit of mac and cheese like he was 2. He had a dinosaur nightlight that cast a soft glow, the kind that makes everything feel safe. After his bath, he wanted to keep his door cracked as Diane had asked. He tucked himself in, pulling his blanket to his chin, and when I shut off his lamp, he whispered, "Chris." I sat in the hallway outside his room for a long time, the nightlight throwing a small circle of warm color. He called my name again, quiet, urgent. When I cracked the door, he said, with that particular 5-year-old mixture of imagination and honesty, "There's someone in my closet." I remember how my stomach dropped, but also how part of me rationalized it. Imaginary monsters, shadows from the nightlight, a dream. I went in, knees soft. The closet smelled like clean clothes. I eased the door open, and there was just a row of little shirts, a box of blocks, a hamper shoved against the wall. I crouched and looked, moved the hamper a little, saw nothing. Charlie's face looked small in the nightlight. "It's okay," I told him. "No one's there. You're fine." I left the door cracked and I stayed in the hallway longer than I should have. Time moves slow when you're trying to proof reality against your fear. I went back to the guest room and tried to read, flipping pages but not reading, listening for anything off. The house was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. Then, sometime later, I heard the closet door creak. It was a soft sound, like a breath. I froze. I told myself I'd left Charlie's closet partly open. I walked slowly, heart in my throat. The door was a sliver farther open than before. I pushed it gently, and the door swung inward. I looked inside and, there, between the hamper and the wall, tucked in a narrow space, were 2 eyes catching the nightlight's glow. Not an animal. Eyes. Human. I can still see them. Small, set back. For a second my brain tried to make sense with thinking. Maybe a doll, maybe a reflection. But there was a shape. A crouched body. I remember the way my legs went numb, how I forgot to breathe. I pulled Charlie up so fast I nearly dropped him. He clung to me like a lifeline. My hands were shaking so hard I could feel it in my teeth. "Stay in the guest room," I said, not knowing if I would be heard, feeling suddenly like a defective adult. I locked the guest room door, turned the deadbolt, then realized I didn't know if the deadbolt was locked back downstairs. I had only ever clicked the bottom latch earlier, the one that pops. The instruction had been to use the top deadbolt too. I remember thinking, I must have locked it. but the doubt spread like oil. I grabbed my phone and called 911. My voice felt thin, and I told the operator what I had seen, a person inside Charlie's room. I didn't use the word intruder at first, because that seems like a big word until it's the only right one. I gave them Mark and Diane's address. I told them to send someone fast. I could hear sirens in the distance and then an agonizing gap of time that felt like forever. I locked the guest room from the inside and shoved a chair under the doorknob like a bad movie gesture, then sat on the floor with Charlie in my lap, his head on my chest. He was shaking, whispering, "Did you see him? Did he have a hat?" I stroked his hair without really feeling it. When police arrived, they moved in with that quiet efficiency that feels both comforting and cold. They did a sweep. I remember standing at the bottom of the stairs looking up at the hallway where Charlie's door was. The front door was open. Cool night air came into the house. Later the officers told me someone had left the front door unlocked. The deadbolt on the back door, someone pointed it out as much as said it, had not been engaged. I kept seeing that gap. I had only latched the bottom latch and not the top deadbolt. It's a small thing, a tiny oversight, and in hindsight it felt huge. Mark and Diane came back, wild with gratitude and fury in different measures. They hugged Charlie like someone had lent them their child back by mistake. Diane's eyes were rimmed red. She kept saying, "I don't understand." Mark kept asking me exactly what I saw, replaying images aloud. Gratitude was there, but there was also finger-pointing in the air, toward whoever had been in the house, toward the door, and in my own chest, toward my memory of not engaging that deadbolt. I remember thinking about all the ways it could have gone differently. What if I hadn't heard Charlie the first time? What if I'd been scrolling my phone? What if that person hadn't been in a crouch but instead had been something else? The police didn't find anyone. They took statements, comforted us as much as they could, and told us they would do extra patrols that night. Diane later told me she found a shoe print on the back patio, a sign that someone had been out there. I kept mulling over the small things, the hammock rope that was a little frayed, the window screen that wasn't quite closed. I had the guilt that survivors get, even when you had done everything you remembered. I had the worry that had little edges to it. What if I'd missed it? What if Charlie was petrified because of something he misidentified? There's no clean answer. After that night, I didn't babysit for Mark and Diane again. I think they stopped asking and I stopped offering. I was 15, and a part of adolescence slid away that night. The world, which had been mostly predictable, acquired an edge. I still remember the color of Charlie's nightlight and the lull of his breathing in my lap. I remember his small voice telling me about the closet. I remember the deadbolt that I had forgotten to lock. I thought that would be it. I thought a single terrifying night would be an outlier. I was wrong. I still think about that deadbolt. I still wonder what would have happened if Charlie hadn't said anything. The memory sits like a bruise, dull and aching, sometimes not noticed until it flares. That was number one, but number two was worse. Story 2. The knife. Age 17. By the time AJ's house came around, I had a little confidence. I thought babysitting was a manageable job. AJ was 8, and usually quiet. His mom had a way of apologizing that made you feel like you were doing her a favor by even considering staying. She left me a long list, bedtime routine where the snacks were, call if anything felt off. This was the 3rd time I'd been there. It was a place I thought I knew. That familiarity is its own kind of trap. Dinner was pizza. AJ ate silently in front of the TV, one slice at a time. He smiled rarely, and when he did, it didn't reach his eyes. I'd found him odd but harmless before. Deep in a game, more interested in the handheld console than in conversation. His house smelled like old markers and lemon cleaner. I was 17, and I slept in the guest room that night at the end of the hallway because AJ's mom wanted me to stay overnight. She said she'd be at work late, and it would be too much to drive home. She left with a distracted thank you, and a tight hug that made me think she was nervous. I lay awake for a long stretch, thinking about school and stupid things, then dozed off. In the middle of the night I thought I heard footsteps, the sort that come from the creak of a house settling, then a weight at the foot of the bed. Not a creak, but a presence. I opened my eyes into black. I sat up and the shape was there, at the foot of the bed. A small figure. The hallway light was off, but the faint glow from the baby monitor upstairs cast a silhouette. The figure was AJ. He stood with his hands behind his back. AJ had a face that looked too old some nights, like the quiet had hardened him. He didn't say anything. I felt myself trying to be calm because panic makes people do reckless things. "Hey," I whispered. "What are you doing up?" He stepped forward and I saw that his hands were empty. Then he thrust them forward and there it was. A kitchen knife, long and flat, glinting faintly in the dim light. I think the world cleaved into two parts in that moment. The part where you try to understand, and the part where you react. I screamed, sound ripped out of me like something physical. AJ dropped the knife and bolted. He ran through the hallway and out the front door. My feet were tangled in the blankets. For a beat I couldn't move. Then my training, non-existent really, took over. I grabbed the phone. I locked the guest room door and shoved something under the doorknob. I called AJ's mom. I told her what I'd seen. She was shocked, and for a split second I thought she might cry. Then she told me to stay put and that she was on her way. She said she'd call his father, his ex-husband, right away. Moments stretched. I remember thinking about the knife on the floor and how surreal it was to see a child holding something designed to hurt. It didn't feel like a cartoon. It felt wrong in a way that made my stomach twist. I was shaking so badly my voice came out thin to the operator. The operator told me to stay where I was. They were sending officers. I sat on the edge of the bed trying to make myself small. Ambulance of imagination started racing. What if he comes back? What if someone else is inside the house? Why would he do that? When AJ's mom arrived, she looked wild. She hugged me first and then said, "What happened?" Like she was asking a puzzle's answer. She was apologetic in a way that felt like she had already blamed herself. She told me later she had been at odds with AJ's father about custody battles, and that AJ's behavior could be more erratic than she would admit. She called his ex-husband and he came over, heavy with anger and confusion. The adults argued quietly in the kitchen while the officers took statements. The knife was on the floor, bagged as evidence by someone who moved like a professional. Gloves, careful steps. They didn't arrest AJ that night. They didn't do anything dramatic. They asked questions, tried to piece motives that I had no right to infer. There was a fumbling attempt to understand how an 8-year-old could acquire such a thing. Someone offered me money for the night with a tremor in the gesture. Apology and payment wrapped together. It was awkward. I left thinking about how odd it was to be paid and pitied at once. Later, the family sent a Venmo with a note that said, "Sorry." That kind of digital apology felt insufficient. The aftermath didn't feel tidy. AJ's behavior was later explained away with words adults use when they're trying to reconcile love and fear. Stress, parental conflict, attention. I had the memory of a small person standing over me with something that could cut. I couldn't square the child's face with the object he had. I stopped babysitting after that. Not immediately because of one night, but because the idea of returning to a place where a kid might walk in with a knife was a weight I didn't want to carry. The surrealness of it stayed with me. How a child's logic can make a dangerous thing feel like an answer to something I couldn't see. I kept thinking about what I could have done differently and landed, again and again, on the same useless loop. I could have stayed awake. I could have locked the hallway door. I could have done small safety things that might not have mattered. But hindsight hardly helps when the present is incomprehensible. I told myself I was lucky nothing happened. I told myself he was a scared kid acting out. I tried to let it go. But every time I walked into a house after that, my shoulders were a little tenser, my ears a little more alert. The world had added a rule I hadn't known before. Threats can wear familiar faces. You'd think after 2 I'd be done. But there was one more. Story 3, The Peekaboo Man, age 21. By 21 I had accepted that some part of the world is quietly dangerous, but I still believed in my family's ability to look after each other. My sister asked me to watch Emma, 6, and Lucas, 9, for one night. It was supposed to be an easy favor. Put them to bed, stay downstairs, keep the house normal. My sister left with a brief text about her late meeting and a kiss on my forehead. She trusted me. I trusted this house. I'd spent my whole life there, and that sense of ingrained safety is hard to shake. We had our usual bedtime rituals. Emma wanted 3 nights lights. Lucas needed his superhero blanket tucked just so. They were cozy, asleep by 9, the kind of kids that made babysitting feel like training in calm. After they were tucked, I went downstairs to watch TV and zone out. The sofa had the familiar dents from years of living, and the living room lamp cast a warm pool of light. I made tea, and for a while everything felt fine. Then Emma came down and said something that made my skin prickle. She climbed up on the couch and said very earnestly, "You were in my room, Chris. You told me to go to sleep." I was momentarily baffled. I had been downstairs the whole time. I put my cup down and went to her room. The blanket was half pulled, the nightlight was still on. I crouched near her bed and she nodded, like telling me a small truth. "You were there. You told me to sleep." I smiled a little, the kind of smile you give to kids when they chatter. Maybe she'd conjured a dream. But a few minutes later, Lucas came down and said the same thing, almost the same words. "You told me to sleep." He sounded calm, not frightened. Both of them claimed to have seen me in their rooms when I knew I hadn't been there. For a while I shrugged it off. Kids say weird things. They have active imaginations. But the hair at the back of my neck stood up. The house took on an atmosphere like the air before a storm. I told them to go back to bed. I checked the doors, front, back, saw they were locked. I left the TV on at low volume and sat there, more alert than before, watching shadows around the edges of the room. A soft noise from upstairs pulled me up like a thread. It was a sound like someone leaning over the railing and playing peekaboo with a child, that rhythm of a giggle, and then a voice low and smooth. Then the voice said, clear as the floorboards, "Aren't they just so special?" I froze at the bottom of the stairs. Slowly I climbed to the landing and there he was, a tall man leaning over the balcony just above the stairwell, his face lit from below by the landing light in a way that made his features weird and elongated. He kept making that peekaboo movement with his hands, not clapping, not waving, like the gesture adults do with babies, but exaggerated and wrong for a grown person. He was looking down at Emma's window and then at me. My throat closed. It was like those reality-bending moments in movies where your brain asks if you're supposed to laugh. He said the line again, "Aren't they just so special?" in a voice that wanted to be soft but landed on creepy. He looked at me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I remember thinking logically that I should call the police. I remember thinking, with an animal clarity, that I should get the kids out of the house first. I grabbed the only thing I could find that felt like defense, an old kitchen knife, though I have no idea why I reached for it. It was more a talisman than a weapon, and moved toward the bedrooms. The man's movement was slow, almost theatrical. He didn't seem surprised to see me. He folded his hands like he was in a living room show and walked the other way as if he was about to leave. "Get the kids," I whispered to myself. I shook Emma awake gently and scooped her up. Lucas was already on the landing, wiping his eyes. They crawled into my arms in socks and pajamas, holding on to me like we were a small island. I buttoned my shirt, grabbed my phone, and we went out the side door barefoot into the neighbor's yard. The night was cold and my feet hurt on the grass, but I didn't stop. I knocked at the neighbor's door until someone woke up and let us in. I called 911 from the neighbor's kitchen, breathless, telling them a man had been in the house and had been doing something. Someone was there. The operator said they were sending officers. We waited with the neighbor who made hot chocolate and spoke quietly, trying to make our small group feel normal again. I told the operator my perception. I thought he'd been in the house before my sister left. I felt stupid admitting that. It sounded like paranoia. But when the police finally came, much later, or at least it felt that way, the man was gone. An officer looked up at the balcony, and then down at the living room. He asked questions about locks and whether anyone else could have been in the house earlier. The kids were held close to me the whole time. My sister called, shaking, and came home as fast as she could. She hugged the children so hard I could hear them catch their breath. She installed cameras a week later, and I think she slept with the lights on for months. The man was never found in that house. No one ever proved he had been inside before. I replayed the sequence endlessly in my head. The kids' identical statements. His peekaboo gesture, the casual tone of his voice. It was the way he looked at the children that lodged in me. A hunger disguised as affection. After that night, I didn't go back to babysit for a long time. My sister was angry and scared and kept asking how he'd gotten in. I felt ashamed of my smallness in the face of the unknown. How could someone be in a house like that and walk away? The police did what they could. People told me it was likely a stranger who had been walking by and seen the kids, someone trying to be intrusive rather than violent. I tried to be satisfied by that explanation, but it didn't sit right. The man's movement was too deliberate, too aware of the interior space. I thought about the children's certainty. They each had the same vision of me in their rooms. Did he enter and mimic me? Did he whisper to them? Their voices sounded calm when they told me, like they weren't sure if I would believe them. We assume kids will invent stories. I learned that sometimes what they invent is only how they try to make sense of something that adults can't. I stopped babysitting after that night for good. The line between normal family life and something intrusive had been crossed, and the confidence I had in familiar spaces wasn't coming back. I'd had 3 nights that taught me bitter lessons about perception and safety, and all of them left a residue of distrust that follows me into quiet houses. Reflection between the stories. Each of these nights has a different flavor of fear. One felt like a near miss from a person inside a child's closet. One felt like a surreal breach by a child with a weapon. One felt like an intrusion that was oddly intimate and performative. They're not cinematic in the way horror movies sell. They are small, jagged moments that changed how I moved through other people's homes. I keep thinking about the kids, Charlie's soft voice in the hallway, AJ's blank face, which I still see sometimes in dreams, Emma and Lucas, and the way they told the same tiny story like 2 halves of the same memory. The children are the reason these stories sit heavy with me. They were vulnerable and they were being watched, or so it felt. What I learned is not some simple checklist you can apply to be invulnerable. It's more like a shifting awareness. You listen closer. You take a child's off comment seriously. You acknowledge that ordinary houses can be the stage of extraordinary fear. Final thoughts. People ask me if I blame myself. Sometimes I do. I am human, and guilt is a reflex. I replayed the small details I could control, locks, where I sat, whether I was on my phone. But blaming myself doesn't change the past. It just carries the pain around with me. The real thing these nights taught me is to respect what feels off, and to trust small alarms. Children's reports matter. Quiet houses can hide chaos. Familiar faces can be frightening. I stopped babysitting for good after the 3rd night, not because I wanted to quit, but because those nights rewired me in a way that made normalcy feel fragile. I moved on with my life, but these memories linger like a thin wound that flares sometimes, a shadow across an otherwise ordinary day. If you babysit or you have kids, this isn't meant to terrify you into paralysis. It's meant to remind you that small things can matter. Listen when a child says something is off. Don't laugh it off like it's nothing. And if something feels wrong to you, trust that instinct. Have you ever had a babysitting nightmare? If you have, leave 1 sentence in the comments telling us what happened. If this creeped you out, like and share it with someone who babysits. Thanks for listening. I'll be back with more stories, but for now, I'm heading home.